Welcome to the Herbworks podcast featuring Roger Drummer, the formulator at herbworks.com. An educator in the field of nutrition and Chinese herbalism, Roger has a unique ability to keep things simple by taking all the guesswork out of complicated health issues. Herbworks is committed to helping you improve your health and enhance your life through herbs and common sense.
Hello, it's Roger from Herbworks, and today I want to talk a little bit about protecting your brain. You know, one of my big things with the products I make is brain health. You know, so the original reason I made Tianqi was to work on something that was called at the time premature aging of your brain. What does that mean? That means that you're experiencing the brain or the memory of a 60-year-old when you're 40. Or maybe you're experiencing the brain of an 80-year-old when you're 60. That is usually based on some pretty basic things, and that's what I try to address when I make Tianqi. You know, one of the things that most people forget when it comes to their brain is that your brain can only run, just like anything else, on nutrients. It's part of the human body. The human body runs on water and food, and if you're not having the best food for your brain that keeps it in its tip-top shape, you have to supplement. You have to supplement certain nutrients no matter how well you eat, because you just don't get the levels that your brain actually needs to survive and thrive. And that's what Tianqi is about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about brain protection today. We're going to talk about what goes on with your brain. We're going to a little bit about neuroplasticity, what that is, you know, how to feed your brain, things that you might be feeding your brain that are terrible for it. So we're going to go over all those things, because a lot of times it doesn't matter what part of your health you're working on. It's just as important to know the things that you're probably doing wrong, or sort of, should I say, just are exposed to, that allows you to make great leaps in your health by eliminating that. You know, it's not just enough to take a few products and forget about your other habits. You have to look at your life in the whole and see what you're doing that really drags you down and wastes energy, or messes up, in this case, your brain function. Because we're all exposed to so many things every single day that if you can eliminate some of them and keep the rest down to a very low level, then the good things that you're going to do are going to make a major impact on how you feel every single day. So first off, I want to talk a little bit about this term neuroplasticity. A lot of people are unfamiliar with that. Really, it's something they've come up with predominantly in the last 5 or 6 years. They've talked about it. And what it is all about is the fact that we now know that your brain can actually rewire itself. You know, a decade ago, nobody had an idea that you could even grow a new neuron in your brain, that any of your brain cells could regenerate. They had no idea. They just thought you were born with a certain amount of activity in your noggin, and that was it. So if you damaged it through alcohol or drugs or whatever you were doing, that was your tough luck, because there's no way of getting any of that back. And the reality is, we now know that that was just all wrong, because your brain, like anything else, just like your physical body, if you take your physical body down to the gym and you lift some weights, by tearing down some muscle, you're going to stimulate the production of more muscle, and you're going to get bigger. It's the same way with your brain. In fact, exercise is really good for your brain. It causes certain chemicals to be released. It increases circulation. It causes you to actually grow new neurons. And so that should be part of any real program. But we know now that you can rewire your brain, but it takes some basic things that you have to pay attention to. One of them is being involved in learning something new. It doesn't have to be a new language. You just have to be able to learn something new. And oftentimes, it could be just picking up a book that you have no idea what the subject's about, and it's really hard for you to understand, and you just make your way through it and try to figure out what it's all about. It's a stressor to you, and it's a stressor to your brain, and it'll actually cause you to grow new neurons. So learn something new. But that doesn't do it by itself. Neither does exercise. But both of those things combined with something else, which is nutrition, is what creates new neurons. Because again, you have to have the building blocks to create something. this was the theory behind Tianqi. I realized, when I started making it, 12 years ago or so, the original formula, that most people that had memory issues or stress issues also had severe nutrition deficiencies. In other words, I could tell from talking to them and their diets and what they supplemented that their brain wasn't getting most of the things it basically needed for normal functioning. And now that they had gotten older, they had probably gone 30 years without having adequate levels of nutrients in their brain. The problem today with modern living is that we've now gone so long, so many decades of fast food, which started in the 60s. We have the fast food generations now where people were grown up, not only grown up on fast food, but their parents were eating fast food for the 20 years before they had children. And so we have this whole segment of the society that is undernourished. It's true, the old saying that the United States is the most overfed and undernourished country in the world. The reality is we eat a lot of food, a lot of calories, but we don't have a lot of nutrition in it. And so this fast food nation now is really basically coming down to creating not only all these memory issues, but all these other conditions that are just growing at a really high rate in this country. Autoimmune, obesity, cancer, all these things can a lot of times be brought back to just levels of nutrition in your diet, levels of nutrition combined with lifestyle, combined with all the other things that are going on, not only lifestyle, lack of exercise, lack of mental stimulation, too much TV. You combine all these things, and you basically end up with a brain that's so undernourished and so starved for attention that you end up with memory problems. And so again, this is where, Tianqi came about to fill that gap. Most people don't even get basic things like choline in their diet. We've been told for so long that eggs are bad for you because of heart disease, and that's gone on for 50 years, and now they know it's not true. But people have starved themselves from one of the main nutrients, choline, that you need to make or grow new neurons in your brain, to make acetylcholine, which is one of the 4 major neurotransmitters and the one responsible for the speed by which your brain works and processes information. So if you don't have that and you're 50 years old and you think there's something wrong with you, you can't keep up, it's more than likely because your brain doesn't have the fuel to keep up. And so you have to change things. And so, but we now know that if you get involved with learning something new and you exercise and you have the right nutrition, the things your brain actually needs every single day, then you will produce new neurons and you can actually grow your brain. One of the things that's the worst thing for your brain, and this has kind of been the big buzzword in medicine now for 10 years, inflammation. We hear about inflammation in connection to almost every disease known to man. And it's true. It's just the inflammation is centered in a certain part of your body or worse in a certain part, and it's creating damage wherever it's at. It's accelerated cellular damage that, again, cannot be taken care of because your body's lack of nutrition isn't there to run the processes to actually not only withstand the inflammation and maybe put it out, but to run the process which protects your DNA and keeps your cells from becoming damaged. So it's the lack of nutrition comes back really is one of the source causes for inflammation, although also you could just be getting exposed to a lot of things that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But your exposure to these certain chemicals then overburdens those systems that are run by nutrition, and so your body doesn't have the ability to withstand the inflammation and it suffers damage.
This podcast is brought to you by Herbworks, specializing in stress and brain essentials. Check out Roger's other articles and videos at herbworks.com. While you're there, take a look at our natural herbal-based product line for energy, stress, immunity, and sleep. Now back to Roger.
So what's causing all this inflammation? the same thing I talked about earlier. A lot of times it's just poor diet, lack of nutrition, obesity. Obesity creates its own inflammatory chemicals that end up causing conditions in your brain. Sedentary lifestyle, not getting out and moving your body. Toxins in your environment. In fact, there's certain toxins that cause your pineal gland to calcify. And once that happens, believe me, you've shut down a whole part of your brain that's just not functioning right. You're not making melatonin. Melatonin has this amazing ability to actually protect your brain from inflammation. It's one of the most powerful antioxidants in your entire body, but you're not going to be making it if you're exposed to a lot of toxic things in your diet and your pineal gland becomes calcified, which they find in very high rates in people that have Alzheimer's and dementia. So that can be due not only to toxins like fluoride, but also just taking a really poor calcium supplement in a really high amount, and your body can't handle it. We weren't meant to take 2,000 milligrams of calcium every day, which is something the medical system tried to get everybody to do for decades and decades, and now it seems like nobody's talking about that anymore. Probably because they found out it wasn't good for you. So I'm going to go over a lot of the neurotoxins that you may be getting exposed to, or you want to start checking your food and your labels to see if it's actually in there so you can avoid it, because these are things that directly cause inflammation in your brain, that can directly affect the ability of your brain to make new neurons or cause it to actually get rid of neurons, which is something you really don't want to do. So the toxins, I mentioned one earlier, is fluoride. Fluoride is terrible for your system. In fact, it's now listed by the World Health Organization as a neurotoxin, meaning, and you know what that means? This is really, I shouldn't laugh, but this is a chemical we've been adding to the water supply in America now for probably 40 to 50 years. I'm just throwing out a number. It's got to be that long, right? And now it's known to be a neurotoxin. A neurotoxin is a chemical that disrupts the way your body creates its own nervous system. It disrupts the way that your body creates its spinal cord, the neurons in your brain, how it repairs those neurons. It interferes with the myelin sheath, the production of the myelin sheath, which is the protective coating of the neurons. And by the way, if you don't have the proper nutrition like choline that I mentioned earlier, you won't make that myelin sheath either. You won't repair the damage to your neurons caused by inflammation. So fluoride actually disrupts this. And this is what's so amazing to me, that we've had this in the water supply. That means that every mother drinking fluoridated water every day was having an effect on their unborn child's nervous system by just drinking unfiltered tap water. And so now it's, we're in the process of, a lot of communities are dropping fluoride. It's been banned in most European countries. They've seen the writing on the wall years ago and removed it. So the reality is that it's, again, one of these things that had very little studies to promote it or support it, and communities got paid to put it in the water, and there you have it. We've been giving our kids and our whole population something every single day that actually destroys their brain. So another one that you might want to pay attention to is aspartame and MSG. Now, aspartame is often called NutraSweet, and you'll notice that it's in a lot of zero-calorie soda pops. It's the main sweetener used in those. And MSG is something that's used to flavor most packaged foods. Now, MSG could be written out in its full name, called monosodium glutamate. You have to look for that, because so many people caught on to the words MSG, the letters. They caught on to it that they started actually writing the name out, and people didn't realize that it was the same thing, right? And so both of these things are listed as excitotoxins. Now, you might not have ever heard that term, but there was a famous neurologist, doctor, who used to talk about it. His name was Dr. Russell Blaylock, and he wrote a book about it. excitotoxins, the taste that kills. And basically, it's a chemical that makes it into your brain and excites your neurons to fire so rapidly that they fall over dead from exhaustion within minutes, and then they create inflammation, and it spreads throughout your brain. So this is where that MSG headache comes from, where they used to talk about this all the time with Chinese food, but it's not just related to Chinese food because it's in so many different things. I've seen boxes of soup, quarts of soup on the grocery store shelf that have 30 grams of MSG in one serving. Think about that. That's like saying you took 60 capsules of a nutritional product, because most of them are 500 milligrams. You took 60 capsules of something at one time. That's how much of that chemical is in a food. So these things excite your neurons to death. Monosodium glutamate, the old story they used to give you in the food chemical industry was that it's made out of glutamate, and glutamate is an amino acid. Glutamine is actually the amino acid. So it's good for your brain. No, not actually. Glutamine, when you get it in a protein food, is part of a protein chain that's used by your body. And there's not that much of it there, that any excess of it is usually taken out of your body, because your brain has protective measures against excesses of that one amino acid. But the reality is that when you take 30 grams of something at one time, it's a flood, and it's an artificial chemical, and it has an entirely different reaction in your system. And so avoid those things at all costs. There's no reason to ever drink a diet soda. It's been proven time and time again that they added to the whole obesity epidemic. It tricks your body into thinking it had sugar, and most people that drink 0-calorie sodas actually gain weight. It's a known fact. The average person drinking 1 can a day usually gains about 15 pounds in a year. It's quite amazing. But another thing that people don't really think about or associate with their brain is gluten. Gluten, that type of, that one protein type chemical that's in wheat products. Gluten causes its own type of inflammation throughout your body. The main way it disrupts your system is how it deals with opening the gaps of your digestive system to let more chemicals, like we're talking about, into your bloodstream undigested, and causing inflammation that way, damaging your gut. But there's another type of inflammation. It can actually trigger an autoimmune condition in your brain. So you might want to consider giving up gluten, and especially if you're experiencing a lot of brain fog and tiredness after you eat, those types of things. Gluten's one of those things when you tell people they have to stop eating it, that you always make sure that they don't have a knife with them, because they might come after you. It's such a shock to people to be told that they can't have their bread, or they'll never eat a pizza for a while. But the reality is that it's probably a good thing for most people to have a healthier relationship to gluten. And by healthier, what I mean is that you could go through a period of a few months, let your system heal from having all that gluten. And some people can actually then eat breads that are fermented, because it changes the way the gluten is in the bread. And maybe they could have it once a week. They could have it rotated in and out of their diet and not cause so much damage and not really notice anything from it. That's all possible with it. But if you're someone that's again experiencing memory issues, having a little bit of brain fog, it's probably on the list that you should cut out right away, just like aspartame, MSG, fluoride, all these other heavy metals like mercury, aluminum. Get them out of your diet and clean it up, and give yourself a good 4 months before you start experimenting back with breads or any type, and try and get into fermented breads. They're easier on your system. I mentioned mercury and aluminum. Everybody knows about mercury. If you love tuna, something like that, make sure that you're buying the cleanest tuna that you can possibly buy. Make sure that you're probably not even eating that one more than once a week at the very most, because it's the type of fish that has high levels of mercury in it. Mercury is terrible for your nervous system. It doesn't matter if you're talking about your brain or any other part of your nervous system. So one of the reasons why tuna is so high, just so you understand this, it's the same way with swordfish. Swordfish, I think, is a little bit higher, but they're very large fish. They eat other fish. All these other fish have toxic loads of mercury, and when they eat them, it becomes more concentrated in them. That's why a tuna or a swordfish has so much more mercury than other fish. Now, the fish with the least amount is sardines. In fact, sardines are supposed to be the healthiest fish that you could ever consume. And why is it? They're tiny little fish. They're not consuming other fish. They have very little amounts of heavy metals in them. So keep that in mind. Now, we talked about basic things. And the reason I brought up all these things that I brought up, the fluoride, the mercury, the aluminum. And by the way, you get aluminum because they combine it with fluoride in your water, in case you didn't know that. They do that to keep the cloudiness out of your water. Nobody likes cloudy water. So anyway, hopefully you're not cooking with aluminum pans. But I mentioned fluoride, mercury, aluminum, gluten, aspartame, and MSG. Man, if you could clear up these things right there, you have made such a quantum leap in protecting your brain, of not exposing it to things. And then if you can make one more little leap there, if you really want to protect your brain, get a handle on your sugar consumption. Because a lot of people, especially those people I mentioned that are sedentary, obese, just overweight in general, pre-diabetic, diabetic, they have this other level of inflammation going on directly related to their sugar intake and the amount of sugar in their bloodstream and the inflammation that causes. So if you can get a handle on that, cut back or eliminate your sugar consumption, clean up your body's ability to handle its own blood sugar, and get a healthy level of blood sugar, boy, you've now really taken out one of the great sources of inflammation. By the way, when you don't do that and you're combining all that sugar consumption with all these other toxins, it's like a forest fire going on in your system. So I want to talk a little bit about the good things that you can actually do for your brain. The things that, every single human being has available to them every single day. And that's just through eating good foods and taking good herbs and making sure you're hitting levels of nutrition that protect your brain and feed it every day. A lot of people know about broccoli, and broccoli is part of this food family that, of broccoli, chard, collard, kale, that whole family of cauliflower. All these things are foods that are not only good for you because of the amount of other nutrition and the amount of fiber in them, but they have something in it called sulforaphane, which is one of the most potent anti-cancer chemicals you could ever consume, but it also protects your brain. And it helps your brain produce this chemical that is like its own antioxidant, right? So this is kind of how, if you include foods like this, these foods, especially the ones in the broccoli family, surprisingly, are the foods that your liver needs to run the process it needs to actually bind with all these other chemicals I talked about, especially the heavy metals, the fluoride, the mercury, the aluminum, other carcinogens that are in your diet. If you're eating the broccoli foods, your liver will produce a higher amount of the enzymes and nutrients it needs to produce to bind with those substances and pass that out of your body so it doesn't affect your entire system, especially your brain. So that's one thing to consider. Coconut oil is great for your brain. Part of coconut oil is just MCT, or medium chain triglycerides, which gives your heart and your brain an alternative food to actually run on. So when you consume things that have or consume a MCT oil or a coconut oil and have very little sugar in your system, you've gone through the process of regulating your sugar. Now you've given your body the ability or the fuel to actually run on something else instead of running on sugar. This is where you have these people, you probably read some of these ads or articles about how someone improved their Alzheimer's by eating coconut oil. Well, if that happened, that means that they were, one, probably diabetic or pre-diabetic and didn't know it, and their brain cells had become insulin resistant. And then the coconut oil gave them MCTs, which their body probably turned into a ketone. And that ketone, which is a water-soluble fat, your own body can make it out of its fat cells, or you can take MCT oil to raise it. That type of a fat, your brain cells and your heart can use to make energy. It's an alternative fuel. And if that person had a great response to coconut oil, you can bet they were insulin resistant and they needed to work on that aspect of their health, because it's that aspect of their health that's completely causing the inflammation and the inability of their brain cells to take up energy. Now, other things that are great for you that everybody has access to, there's an herb called ginkgo, which is an amazing herb for circulation in your whole body, but especially your brain. I don't put ginkgo in Tianchi because ginkgo is one of the worst tasting substances known to man, and there's just not any other substances known to man that'll cover the taste of that foul tasting herb. But it's a great herb to take in a capsule. So if you want to buy some capsules and take one when you take your Tianchi, it's a pretty great herb. And it's been known for, decades that it's great for your memory, all because it increases circulation. A huge segment of memory issues is just lack of circulation in your brain. And so ginkgo is really good for that. Green tea is an amazing neuroprotective herb, and I put a great dose of that in my Tianchi because it has such a great ability to work as an antioxidant in your brain. It makes it up in your brain. And I use a special form, a phytosome is what it's called, which means that it's bound to a fat. It comes from a pharmaceutical company and they bind it to a fat. So when it's taken up by your body, it still stays active in your system 8 hours later. Most green tea, when you have it, has an activity level of about an hour. So that's what's amazing about it. And green tea is something that everybody has access to. One of those things anybody can do to help protect their brain. There's other herbs, that you can take. Things like turmeric is a great everyday herb that you can take that deals with inflammation in your brain. But one of the things that most people still overlook when they look at brain function, and this goes back to the original idea why I made Tianchi, is that we don't look at how basic things are required by your brain, and we don't meet those basic requirements. If you notice with Tianchi, if you're one of our regular customers, we have a lot of customers, by the way, that have been with us for 10 years. It's quite amazing, right? It's amazing these days to even know anybody for 10 years, let alone have a customer for 10 years. But the reality is all those people notice that we're constantly changing Tianchi. And why is that? Because there's new research comes out on optimum brain function. There's new research that comes out. And one of the last things I did with Tianchi was to add a special form of folic acid and a special form of B12 to the formula. Now, why did I do that? Because, with folic acid, over half the population can't absorb it. And so I have a special form of methylfolate, which means it's methylated or in a form that your body doesn't need to do anything to it. It just takes it up and utilizes it in your brain. And so then I have the same thing with B12. A lot of people don't realize there's 3 or 4 versions of that, but it's the methylcobalamin that is in the form that your brain actually takes up and utilizes. That's the form that'll make it into your nervous system, just like the methylfolate. And why is this all important? Because again, remember when I mentioned earlier how your body can, through neuroplasticity, make new neurons? Well, you can't do that without the right nutrition. And a lot of people, because of the fast food nation that we are, have been born and grown up without adequate levels of methylfolate and adequate levels of methylcobalamin, B12, and so their brain and nervous system never fully developed. It's never really been in its fully healthy state, and it might be just healthy enough for them to function what they consider to be normal, but now a crisis comes along. They have a stressor, or they get an injury, they're in an auto accident, they hit their head, and the body has no reserves of energy, or it doesn't have the strength, the internal strength to fix itself. And that's what these nutrients are really about. And so your brain cannot make new neurons without adequate folic acid in the right form, without adequate B12 in the right form. And this is why there's a lot of research coming out on how these two things are tied into conditions like Alzheimer's, dementia, memory issues. It's all because starvation of the brain plays a huge role in all of those things. So to summarize here today, I hope you got the idea here behind not only a program to protect your brain, but just about the same real concept you could apply to protecting any part of your health. And that is, look at the things that tear your system down. Look at the things you're exposed to, you put in your body every day that just have a negative effect. It causes you not only to lower your energy trying to deal with it, but it robs your bodies of what little reserves of energy and nutrients it has to try to run the systems to protect itself and to offset the amount of toxic chemicals you put in it. And then if you do that and combine it with, wow, a whole new level of great nutrition and things for stress, because stress causes some of the worst inflammation in your brain. If you combine that strategy with the strategy of taking these other things out of your diet, exercise just a little bit, get involved in some fun new things, you're now creating an entirely new environment for your brain, an environment where it actually has all the nutrients it needs to grow, to maintain itself, and to really put neuroplasticity into effect. And that's the type of brain you want. You want a brain that actually will be able to adapt and grow and keep up with the times. Well, thanks for tuning in. This is Roger from herbworks.com. And if you want more information, you can go to our website or tune into our blog.